this next part is my, or Cam's library thought experiment. And this is how you combat the cumulative case argument. And you'll notice that as soon as Michael realizes what's happening, he probably realized it right at the beginning, but at some point he put a stop to it because it is kryptonite to the cumulative case. Because what I did is take a listen. Okay, but I want to try to figure out how we're different because I want to see if we have get the same answers between us. So you and I work for a library and we're given a book. And we're put in charge of deciding where this book goes in the library. And so the thought experiment goes, you and I open the book and we just read one random page. There's no cover on this book. We don't know the year, who wrote it, whatever. But we read up one page of the book and it talks about a man who can just run off a cliff and fly. This man can just fly. And so now the question I have for you is, if you and I were to look at each other in the eyes and say, okay, would this be more likely, would we shift this towards the fictional part of the library or the history part of the library? What would you say?
Based on limited reading and a posteriori evidence, we'd have to say fiction because we don't have any of that in background knowledge.
Okay, so if you knew nothing about the Gospels and you're reading it for the very first time, and you just happen to open up the page where it talks about Jesus walking on the water, Michael would say, this is probably fiction. Agreed. So we're the same there. I would say that would lean towards fiction. Now, what if we read on and the next page it says that 500 people saw this happen?
Mm-hmm.
Would we tend to move this back towards the history section?
I wouldn't yet. There's not enough evidence.
Yes, I wouldn't yet. There's not enough evidence. Now, keep in mind, this is what's going through my head. I am focusing on 1 Corinthians 15 here. This is some of the earliest evidence for Christianity for the resurrection. I'm going to the earliest source, I think the best reason to believe in the resurrection, Paul. It's still horrible, but Gospels are terrible. And so I am layering in one at a time the evidence from 1 Corinthians 15. And notice both the 500 witnesses and the claim of a man flying, just because 500 witnesses saw it in the book, it's that claim. No, this is still probably fiction. Right, I wouldn't either. Especially because
I need to read more of the book.
Right, and so let's keep adding the things in. At what point you tell me when you would shift it towards history?
Well, if we're going to just keep doing these hypotheticals, I don't see how this is really going to do anything. I would like to, if we're going to talk about it, maybe we should just talk about what you're kind of getting at, because you mentioned...
What I'm getting at is an inconsistency in your epistemology. That's what I'm getting at. And anybody watching, I think, can see that. And so if Michael had the patience and if I had the patience to just continue on, I bet you I could list all the things that he listed for the resurrection of Jesus. And my guess is, I don't know this for certain, but my guess is he still wouldn't believe that this man flew. Any comments, Cam?
It's very difficult when giving this thought experiment to convey that we're not encouraging with each step for the person to make a conclusion about whether or not it is history or fiction, but instead we're asking the question, when you read this bit of evidence, which direction does it push it? And just there, I think I noticed that he slipped into the conclusion side of things. No, I wouldn't conclude it was history on the basis of that. But I'm more interested in the question of would it have shifted you toward fiction, even if it didn't get you all the way there?
Yeah, that's a great point, because many times he just claimed agnosticism. But But I'm not asking knowledge questions. I'm not asking what he knows or what he doesn't know, what he's concluding or what he's not concluding. I'm asking exactly what you said. Would you say this is probably more history now? Where does it shift? And I think if I could have gone longer and just keep layering in the evidence and quotes from Paul for the case of the flying man, would still keep this on the fictional side of the library.
A miracle. You mentioned 500. So why don't we talk about what we actually have in reality, not what we could come up with in a hypothetical?
Because hypotheticals are great tools to figure out, this is another common thing after years of doing this, if for some reason theists are more hesitant towards hypotheticals than non-theists. I don't know why. Well, I know why. Learn about ourselves, to learn about if maybe these biases are coming into play, when and where and how. So let's just go with this a little longer. And if you want to stop, you can. But we both agreed that if we see a page of a man flying, we would say this is more likely fictional than history, right? We both agree that even if it said that 500 people saw it, we'd still say this is probably still more likely fiction than history. What if one person said, many people from the day that it happened, there was a belief system at that time that this man, yes, he really did. In other words, a creed was about this guy who could fly. I personally would still say it's fiction. How about you? So we got five.
So you say there's 500 witnesses that saw it, right? So
yeah, in the book, yeah.
Now this is written in a modern Western culture, correct?
We don't know.
So we don't know. At some point we have to become agnostic about it until we can actually read the whole book.
Yeah, at this point I should have said, we're not coming to the conclusion. We're just saying, would this nudge towards history or fiction? And I've now listed almost every main key point in 1 Corinthians 15. And we got the creed, an early creed of a man flying. We got the 500 witnesses of the man flying. We got the claim itself that the man flew. And I think if Michael and I are both honest, working in that library, that book wouldn't go 1 inch closer to the history section at this point.
And I think the difficulty of why it doesn't or shouldn't is that we're really asking the question, is the claim being true that the man can fly? Is that more likely if there is a creed about it? But the thing is that we know that in history, creeds about miracle claims occur. Groups of believers believe in miracle claims with a surprising frequency. It's actually not uncommon for people to come to believe things that didn't occur and report that. And so this idea that simply evidence of a group of people believing something could be evidence that their belief is true, that doesn't actually work.
Yeah, what you just said, Cam, makes so much common sense. I know I try to avoid what makes sense, but it's like you take it off Christianity, and I think every Christian agrees with you. Just because a whole bunch of people believed in a creed or a set of beliefs doesn't make it true at all. 1 Corinthians 15 is that creed. A lot of Christians just hold up. It goes right back to, like historians say, right back to the years from the date of the purported event. So, look at the evidence. No, you would not accept it for the flying man. Why are you accepting it for the resurrection?
Okay. I mean, why can't I just be agnostic until we find more data about it?
Okay. At what point would you say that this is more likely fact or history?
I don't know.
So I think the difficulty is now he's doing this interesting thing. Okay, we started with the scale like this, right? And history is on this side. This is the history section of the library. And this is the fictional section of the library. And this is right in the middle. right at the beginning, when you told him that the claim made in the book is that there was a man who was flying, he shifted it in his mind, I think, very significantly toward this side, because he said, well, we don't have people flying in our background knowledge. And now, when these questions are continuing to come up, he's now trying to do this thing where he shifts the book into the middle, because he's saying, well, why can't we be agnostic about it? Well, agnostic generally gets translated into meaning that we are, neither more certain either way. And so, hang on, what happened to the claim being over here? Why did we just magically shift into the middle all of a sudden, just because we started evaluating more pieces of the text? We should be sticking with the fact that we started over in the fiction section because it was an incredibly unlikely claim.
You have to read the whole book.
No, but what can you imagine that you could read that would convince you, no, this is history?
Okay, well, I'd have to read it and find out, A, what culture it was written in. So where it was written. I need to find out if it was written in a hostile culture. I need to find out if the people...
So one thing to bear in mind is that the culture the claim is made in has no bearing on how likely it is for the claim to be true. People flying goes against everything that we know about the laws of physics from our background knowledge. It doesn't matter if the person was 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. It doesn't matter.
Saying it, how could they have been sincere in what they were saying? I need to find out if they were able to convert skeptics. I need to find out.
Now, listen, he's basically giving all the evidence that he knows of or reasons to believe in the resurrection. He's applying it to the flying man now. And unless I get all those things, that is the reason why I believe in the resurrection, I'm not going to believe in the flying man.
And do you know what's really interesting about this whole section of the video is that instead of going to things that would actually better provide evidence, he goes to the things that he has available to him within the Christian context, for the resurrection claim. And what I mean by that is, for example, instead of choosing something that would be extremely powerful evidence for the claim, so for example, that we actually had 5 other texts by sober historians that told us who they were, when they were writing, and how they received their information. Instead of that, he goes to items that we have with respect to Christianity.
Yeah. And since we don't know when the flying men flew, he could have said, well, if we had 5 different news networks reporting it from 5 different camera angles, that we can check to see if they've been doctored or not. Like, we don't know what time period it is. There's so many things he could have said that could have bolstered the flying man claim, but no, he went immediately to what we have for or what he thinks we have for the resurrection.
So one thing is, I think that what we're having revealed here is such an unprincipled methodology, because there's nothing that tells us which of these things and what magnitude we need in order for us to believe it. It's just like listing out all the things that we have for Christianity.